If I could close the curtains, I don't know if it would really, yeah, I don't know what to really do about it.
That's okay. You know, it doesn't bother me a bit, and it just kind of gives a nice kind of theatrical glow to things.
Yeah, it's ethereal.
Yeah, there we go. There we go.
There we go.
Awesome. Well, thanks for being here, and welcome everyone to another of the interviews that we've been doing on Zoom for the library. As always, my name is Christopher, and I am the Outreach and Engagement Librarian here on campus. And this is another in our series where we just talk to cool people who do cool things. And today's cool person is Wi-Moto Nyoka, sorry. And she is a writer and transmedia artist. She is the founder of Dusky Projects, creating and producing horror and sci-fi content for young adult and adult audiences. Her awards and honors include Puffin Foundation grant recipient, the Bricks Comic Book Theater Festival selected librettist, Indie Boots Theater Festival finalist and audience award honorable mention, ART New York Creative Space grant recipient, multi-stage new works contest semifinalist, One-Eyed Rabbit Black Screenwriters grant semifinalist, and many more besides. She holds a BFA in music theater from the University of the Arts and an MFA for performance and interactive media arts from Brooklyn College. So welcome, Wi-Moto, sorry.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Christopher, for calling me a cool person who does cool things. I'm very excited
Yeah,
to be
absolutely.
to be called cool. When you make horror and sci-fi, that's not a word that's usually used.
Yeah.
With you get used to it's a lifetime of just being like the nerd. So
Sure.
it's kind of amazing to be called cool at
Well,
all.
everybody who knows me knows that I always make very nerd friendly spaces. So and I am also quite a horror nerd. So which is something else that my fellow librarians know about me.
Oh good. This will be a fun conversation.
Yeah, well, I just kind of I guess I wanted to start off by asking about because you're working in like all kinds of media. Like you've written like short fiction, you've done like plays and
Mm.
like transmedia installations and all kinds of things. So I guess I'm kind of curious about you know, just thinking of yourself as an artist, like how did you get about like getting involved in all these different kind of like media and genres and all of these things?
Yeah, I mean the genre really stuck from early on. So the genre was I've been reading horror and loving horror and sci-fi since I was a kid. So that really hasn't moved in the sense of like it's always been centered. But the different disciplines really happened from necessity mostly. So I started in dance. I was doing dance and theater in high school. I went to performing arts high school in Portland, Oregon. And that was really what I was doing. And then I majored in music theater. And for a while, I was just doing just regional theater actor. I have actors equity, just kind of like singing show tunes. Here we go. And then that just kind of, I don't know, it's like the magic for me died in that. Like just the grind of auditions, open calls, the state of music theater at the time. This was pre In the Heights. Well, I remember auditioning for that, but it was yeah, it's like very limited types, limited roles for anybody that looked like me. And so I started writing music, and then for a while that was what I was doing, and I was just, I was like, okay, I'm going to be a full-time musician. And there you can really build your own, you are to build your own alter ego. Like that is what people want. And so it allows for all this experimentation, and music is actually quite interdisciplinary. Most musicians also make music videos, also do this, also do that, because you can't just listen to music, you also have to see it, and experience it in many different ways. But it really stemmed from just, I wanted to make work for myself and my friends. And so in doing that, then I'm like, oh, why don't I try this? Oh, why don't I try that? And you just sort of get your hands on things and go at it. And there's some of the earlier, like the first like big transmedia project I ever made, I like did not know what I was doing. I didn't even know how to write a screenplay, and I'm making webisodes as I don't know anything. I was doing this on like a flip camera. Like I knew nothing. In fact, going to Brooklyn College for interactive media had a lot to do with me just saying, like, I have to sit down and learn the tech of what I'm doing. I'm making these things, and it's really like cart before the horse. Like, I just kind of end up in places where I'm in front of equipment. I'm like, I don't even know how to do this thing, turn this thing on. And I was like, oh no. And just figuring it out, like building the plane as I'm flying it, until finally it was just like, let me take an editing class. Like, let me take single camera producing and directing. Like, let me actually figure this out, get the right software for screenplay writing, just kind of take myself more seriously and not sort of always reacting in a way. I feel like in the beginning it was very reactionary, but it really, all of these different spaces of dabbling really just came from, I want to work as an artist. I want to make work for myself. I want to make, and then eventually like, I want to make work for other people when I started producing works. And that's really what it, in many ways, it still sort of stems from. So it wasn't a plan at all. The plan was to like be a music theater performer for a very long time, until I was like, maybe not. So I wish it was a little more, I don't know, strategic, but it's not.
Yeah, no, I mean that makes complete sense. And like one of the things I'm interested by it, like especially when it comes to like transmedia and I guess talking a little bit about genre is that like those were like my first early exposures to that kind of field, I guess. Like the example I often use is like the first time I like watched the Blair Witch Project and it had all these other elements, right? And that was just kind of like mind-blowing to me, right? That you had like all these other media components that were helping to tell this story. And so I guess like is there something about like horror and sci-fi when you're working in those spaces that I guess lend themselves to being a little more experimental or trying out different things and just like really going for it?
Yeah, I think, and in particular, I'm thinking of like the last days of Kartika, that piece that I did, which operates like it's a staged work. The prequel is a music theater, then there's the series, and then I did installation performance art piece, right? So I designed this projection design that was reacting to my voice, and I would do that in gallery spaces. But it was all put together. The common denominator was the music, like was always the same music, and it was always referring to the same songs, and this is like the soundtrack of this. And all of that really has to do with world building. So I think that's why you find that a lot in genre pieces, is because you have to build a world anyway. And so if you can incorporate other disciplines and have them have some kind of like nucleus where they meet, whether it's like it all comes back to the comic book, or it all comes back to the video game, or it all comes back to the album, whatever that is. But it's just helped to flesh out this world. Like that's a genre where we want you to step into this world. I'm not saying that other stories aren't trying to do that, but in this one, and specifically because it's not the world that right, that I'm asking you to step into. So it's not a drama, it's not a comedy, where funny things happen in real life. Like, I'm saying this is taking place on Mars, so I have to really explain and have you like be immersed and feel this is what I believe life on Mars is, right, in the year 2065, if I'm in the future or I'm in the past or whatever I'm doing. So I think that's why you see that a lot. Also, people just love, in general, I think immersive storytelling is just what's happening. Like, people want to be inside of it. They want to experience it in many different ways. They want different access points into it. So you see that a lot more and more, and in a way that kind of makes everything feel like it's a genre piece, whether it is or it isn't. I see that far more often now than I remember seeing it before, when it was a little more, I don't know, like avant-garde when an artist would do that, right? And now it's kind of like, if it's not a visual album, then why didn't you make one? Right? Like now it's kind of what people want and expect, is more than one discipline having some kind of like intersectional or intersectionality going on in your work.
Yeah, thank you. That I think I really like what you said about how it's kind of like um, that like the genre almost has kind of like informed the medium, right? So it's become like super like you almost expect it, right? And I think that makes a lot of sense because I do find that I'm really drawn to like just that really immersive storytelling, right? Even if it's just like a podcast where you've got like, you know, music going and all these things and you just get really into it or whatever it might be. So when you um, and this may be different depending on like the discipline you're working in or and so on, but I did want to kind of ask about your influences, just like and I guess I'll keep that kind of broad because it may be creative influences or it may be and you'll have to pardon my cat, he's going to interrupt occasionally.
Yay, cats are welcome.
And just kind of other influences that helped you like, I guess, find your voice as an artist.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, I feel like there's the obvious ones. So I'm going to give a shout out to R.L. Stine and Lois Duncan and Christopher Pike, who I spent all of my adolescence reading. So we're just going to start there. Annette Krauss, the one who wrote The Silver Kiss. I think I still have that book somewhere and I reread it every now and then. So, and I'm also dating myself. And so there's that. And then the Octavia Butler, surely, and all of the people that are coming out now, N.K. Jemisin, Nalo Hopkins, oh my gosh, Tony Adeyemi, you know, everybody who's really knocking it out the ballpark in adult literature or YA. I look at them, I look to them. I like to just follow whoever's doing some wacky things. So it's never one artist that's in. I like to keep that kind of up and going. So I'm expanding into visual artists now that I follow, or museums, especially now that museums have opened up and they're like, we have all these virtual tours, and I'm like, great, now I can see your stuff. So, you know, I'm following the Contemporary Museum of Native American Arts, which I think is in Santa Fe, maybe it's out west. Dawn Okoro, who has she does a lot of mixed media, really big paintings. I like watching her or looking at her work. So Instagram is really great for that because you can just kind of like curate these things. And then one leads to the other, to the other, to the other. So there's a lot of sort of surrealist and Afrofuturist artists that I follow, that I look at, and that I am inspired by. And then now I'm getting into podcasts and horror podcasting. So there's some horror podcasts that I like. I really love Girl That's Scary and the way they talk about horror movies. And I find that to be very inspirational. I love that it's just like kind of this growing lexicon. So I try to just always be looking and listening, and definitely pulling from sources that are maybe outside the genre. Like my partner just introduced me to Charles Bukowski's poetry, which I was unfamiliar with and love. And I'm like, well, this is great. So now I'm watching YouTube videos where he's just like drinking beer and heckling an audience and reading his sad, bleak poetry. And I love it. and it feels somehow genre to me because they're in black and white and it's all like, I don't know, it's like the 60s or 70s, but and he's like so beatnik. It doesn't even feel like he's like living in the same timeline. I'm like, who is this dude? And he's talking about like, just don't try. And he's smoking and drinking. It's all very cool. Some people just kind of, you know, like live in their own world, and that's also very inspiring. I also like to be inspired by mainstream things. I've been doing a rewatch of all these hero movies that I've been looking at. You know, they all kind of blur together and you forget about them. And I'm like, whatever happened in the second Matrix? I forget. And just like, let me watch it, you know, and really, but looking at this work in a way of like, you know, delights me or what resonates with me, what, especially now that it's like going back looking at it, like what do I see now that I didn't see because I was watching it in its time. And now you get to kind of like look back and say, oh, I get how we had this movie, and then we eventually got to like the content that I'm looking at now, and thinking of it more as the stories that we tell ourselves, and in a way as a mythology that we're creating, like really looking at those films in that light. And with everything that's going on in the world, art often reflects what's happening in society. It's what we fear or what we hope. So definitely going back and looking at these like big films, like I was like, let's watch the X-Men movies again. like I don't remember what happened in X-Men First Class. What was the second one even called that came after that? And watching them kind of sequentially and saying like, yeah, these are the stories that we're telling ourselves. These are the heroes, how our heroes change the rules for the heroes. So especially in genre work, I think, is it's so reflective of like the id of a society, to see that and then like get it, like up into now when you're looking at the recent WandaVision and what is the Falcon and the Winter? What is it called?
I think it's Winter Soldier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to watch it like at like not like as a fan and like I love the but kind of at a like as a mythology, as in like ethos, as a like this is how we're coping, and seeing the way our heroes have changed and finding inspiration in there too, because these creators are responding in time and to their time. It's a very long answer to your question.
No, that's great. I love long answers because then there are like all these little like it throws a bunch of seeds in the ground, and I really like that because then that's you get lots of cool plants that way. So, but something you said that I thought was really interesting, just about like how the stories kind of reflect the things that we're thinking about in society, like whether it's something we fear or something we're I guess aspiring towards, or what have you. So I guess I'm kind of curious, like do you find that maybe storytelling in general or genre storytelling, like does that allow like certain freedom in talking about things, or is it just like because I guess I'm just kind of curious about like a nonfiction writer might like approach something just very journalistically, whereas like when you're working in like creative spaces, I guess I'm just kind of curious about like, is there freedom in that, or does it just kind of open up new ideas about how to talk about things and that sort of thing?
I always find it to be freeing. I'm of the opinion that it is freeing, only because you get to make new rules. So if you're looking at the Lilith Brood, right, that whole series of Octavia Butler's, I think it's 4 books. I don't know. I read them all back to back like they were one. She built a whole new future for Earth. Like it's entirely new, operating on whatever the rules that she invented at that time. So that allows you to imagine being with other people in a way that you're not maybe getting to do right now, or that you wish you could. Or it allows you to critique what you're doing right now. Probably a little bit of both. So I do think that it is extremely freeing, and also kind of, and it's revealing. Like, I think what's interesting about genre work is the kind of tiny confessions that are being made, whether the creators are aware or not that they're making them, and how that changes, especially now that we have more perspectives in the genre, how that changes depending on like who is telling the story. In particular with horror, I think I love it so much because it's a very intimate genre, although nobody would say that probably or look at it that way. But you're writing about what scares you. You're writing about what scares us, whatever the us is in that, whoever the fill in the blank for the us that you're speaking from, or to. So that's a really personal thing to do that, to share, this is what my monsters look like, this is what terrifies me, how about you, you're like sharing it and it's like an invitation, and you, and that can be very, writing what scares you is very freeing, because then you have to like break it down, stare it in the face for one, describe it. Then there's all the like craft of writing that needs to happen. And in doing that, you sort of demystify your own boogeyman, which is super exciting and kind of addictive. Like once you do it once, you're like, what's the next thing that's scary? Like then you kind of become this like fear junkie. I'm like, let me get the next thing that really scares me and like break that apart down to little pieces. Great. Let me get what scares me even more than that. Like you're constantly like kind of mining your own nightmares. And it can, I don't know, for me, it can be very empowering to just even say that like that's what I do. I actually want to know. I mind my own nightmares. I'll think about them and write them down, and like rather than I'm trying to avoid them or forget them. It's like no. I want to document them. It's a little weird. It's morbid, but so is life, and so is everything that's happening right now. So I do wonder. I do feel that it is important in that way for people. You do that so that people can also do that. There is a release, so we can release this fear or look at this fear or practice, and again, going back to what we were saying before of like the stories that we tell ourselves, I think it's interesting that horror has really catapulted itself into the mainstream now, and horror movies come out all the time. It's not just October anymore. It's not just like, sometimes it was like a Valentine's Day horror, now it's just like every month of the year it's always a good time for horror. And if you look at what's happening in the world, that kind of matches up, doesn't it? That we now have a taste for this genre, since everything is so scary. I think we're rehearsing.
Yeah, no, that makes so much sense. And it reminds me of, I'm going to get this wrong because it's been too long since I read it, but they did some research that that their like horror movies became more popular, or I think they made more money during times of like political upheaval. So they would mark out like after 9/11, it made like, there was like a huge boom and like all of these periods. So I think you said that there's really interesting that it can kind of, I guess, speak to our fears and be a kind of a source of empowerment, which is really cool. Do you feel like the, I guess, building on that, do you feel like the last year, or year plus, I guess, has changed the way you kind of like approach your art? Now, obviously there's going to be technical aspects because we're like doing this through Zoom and all of that stuff, but I guess just kind of more generally, has it, like, have you discovered anything interesting about your art, or new directions that that have kind of built in response to the craziness of the last year?
Yeah, I mean, the last year had me afraid of things that I didn't even know I was scared of. So there's new fears to write about and try to figure out, like, oh, I didn't even know I was scared of that. Um, Also, like, just, when things are so terrifying, and then it's like, well, why would I even write a horror story right now? So then you really have to, it really helped me solidify like why I do it, because I felt like if I'm going to do this now in the middle of a global pandemic and historic civil unrest, I really have to have a good reason for scaring you, because you could in fact just look outside and like you don't actually need a scary story right now. So if I'm going to say no, you need a scary story, I need to have a good argument. So I like, under that opinion of like, horror is a very intimate, it's intimate, and that there's power in that. There's power in that authorship, of who gets to say what scares them, because it could in fact be a road to empathy. If my monsters are going to look very different than your monsters, and that might be a moment for us where we can come to find out we're scared of the same things, or look and be like, oh, we're scared of very different things, and what does that mean, um I've noticed that I've taken that approach now of like, this is really essential, because you're going to come in and you're going to tell this scary story, and you're going to have new rules to the way your scary stories work. They're not necessarily going to go by established formulas, because you're not scared of those things, right? You're not really scared of the pretty girl, so she doesn't have to die in the first 5 minutes. Like, you don't really hold that in you. Yeah, didn't, whatever that was, it's not where you're coming from. So something else is going to happen in the first 5 minutes of your scary story. And that's going to be interesting. You'll have different boogeymen, looking at it that way, as opposed to like before, where I kind of feel like I was just like doing it because I loved it. And then it was the why, the real intention behind it solidified this past time, this time in isolation, I guess, because I had time to think about it.
Yeah, thank you. That makes a ton of sense. And I guess one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, because I mentioned you have so many different projects and things that you've worked on, like in all these different spaces. And so I just kind of wanted to get your own sense of, like, do you have like favorite projects in particular, or things that you're particularly proud of that you wanted, that I guess I'm kind of curious about your own reaction to your own pieces and things that you just felt particularly drawn to, and maybe because maybe that can use that as a way to give people I guess ideas who are encountering your work for the first time, like maybe these are ones to seek out first.
Right now, last year, speaking of like why horror, we started a podcast called Black Women Are Scary, where we produced short horror stories by up and coming BIPOC authors. And that it really stemmed from, I just wanted to find my tribe. I was like, I can't be the only one. You're out here. Where are you? So, I started this podcast, and now I've gotten to know, that's grown in the sense where we're working with independent publishers and getting to know all these new authors and their work, and showcasing their stories. So it's very small. We do like once a month an episode, and then we follow it up with what we'd like to call a macabre mixer, where we have this interactive online event where you do a Q&A, and we play games based on their work, and you really get to know the author and get to know each other. That has been great. Like, that was not anything that I saw myself doing. Really, I didn't even know that I liked audio work. And that project ended up, rolling over into guest spots on other people's podcasts, and also writing audio plays. So I was able to write transfer one of my staged works, which were a series of vignettes of these like horror stories. It was kind of like the Twilight Zone, but there was a political undertones in all the stories. So it was really an exploration on second class citizenship. And I would use, the various different kinds of supernatural beings to really kind of serve as metaphor for that. And I was able to move that from a staged work to an audio work for a Heartbeat Ensemble. And I was like, this is really great. I had a really great time doing this. And it was not, I didn't see that one coming. That just kind of happened. So definitely now I'm very interested in horror in an audio sphere, and like the role that sound plays in horror in general, in building tension, regardless of the piece. So I would say that one. And before everything shut down, I was in the middle of two projects. So it was this stage work called El Otro Lado del Destino, which is the other side of destiny. And it was another kind of immersive piece. It incorporated projection design and sound design. So I was kind of already messing around with the idea of like sound influencing how, how a space feels, and telling a horror story, although this wasn't really a horror story. It's a story about a family of espiritistas, which is a kind of spirituality in Latin America. It's actually practiced all over the Americas. And I just wanted to tell a possession story through the lens of not the Christian church, just because I had never seen it. So I was like, I know other people have different relationships to possession. That it's not inherently demonic. There are different rules. And I'm like, I'm going to tell she's possessed story. It's in a house. It's just a family, like that whole dynamic, only it's not going to be the rules that you typically see. So that work was really great. I don't know if, it was able to be workshopped in several different places, and it was kind of like, had its little like steam under it before theater just stopped. And I was very excited about that. I'll be excited like to maybe pick that up again. And then there was Cold Sweat, which is my first venture into work for young audiences. So it's meant to be an anthology. I modeled it after like Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark? I don't know if you remember these. And we did like one short, like what would be like the first episode. So like one short film called Wham! And it's about this evil soda that's trying to take over the school, and the like Scooby Gang that figures it out and defeats them. All those things that you remember in all these shows. And that was really fun. I made it in collaboration with People's Theater Project, which is this youth theater company up in Washington Heights, as well as the middle school in East New York that I was working at the time. So there was like real like combination of trained actors and then like young folks at school who were like in an artist after school program, and it's like their first movie, and then like trained obviously professional filmmakers. We were able to get quite a lot of in-kind donations and backing behind making this one thing, and even a grant from Puffin Foundation to do a local screening tour. So we had a lot of intimate screenings at libraries and with youth activist groups, because there was this like thread of food justice that was kind of in the film. So we would have we'd have really interesting talkbacks with young people, different like education of anti-violence, like different summits and like things like that. And that also kind of like just stopped when it was in a couple of festivals last year, so it did get to keep going in that way, in the virtual, since a lot of the festivals went virtual. But in terms of having those screenings that we were having, that they were facilitated, and really was like an intergenerational conversation, that didn't really keep happening last year. And I hope it's still doing the film festival circuit, so I hope to kind of find some sort of way to return to that, or get that back to the audience that I think it belongs to, which is a middle school audience.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and I'm so glad that you brought up Goosebumps and Are You Afraid of the Dark? Because I so much, very much wanted to be part of the Midnight Society when I was growing up. I was so jealous of those guys. I wanted to ask, because you mentioned like kind of politics and activism like as part of that. Are there in your work, do you feel like there are particular like themes or I guess political subtext or whatever that are incredibly important to you as a creator that you want to make sure that your work I guess evokes?
I'd say the only political subtext is just who I center. And that's it. So sometimes it's a little, like in the case of Wham, right? That's part of the Cold Sweat anthology. It's really following all the rules that one in a way is a bit formulaic. Like it's pretty much like you're watching the Midnight Society. It's a Scooby Gang. It's very reminiscent of Buffy, and the gang gets together and they defeat the big bad. It's just that it's set in a middle school in East New York, which you don't see, and so the what they're fighting against and what the kind of obstacles that they come up against when they do this are rooted in their reality, are rooted in the reality of being, you know, a Black or brown student in a public middle school in the US, and what happens when you speak out or when you start a protest or any of that, like the way you're treated. How are you going to get adults to believe you? Assumptions that have already been made about you. So like that already is present. You know, I would say like here you have this political conversation, but at the heart of it, it's just a bunch of kids who save their school. Like it's the same exact thing. So I tend to do things like that where it's like I'm centering this person, and because I have to do this and I'm going to do this well, there's going to be these other political conversations that were just going to happen because of who is centered. But at the end of the day, this is a story about, you know, killer clowns or whatever it is. You know, like I have a short story that's just about spiders taking over New York. Like it's just giant spiders, but it's who I chose to be the survivors, where I think then that's where the politics might come into, because it's not who you typically see. And that it kind of stops there. Like there are some things where I'm not really even saying more than I'm like, I literally am just like, she's just Mexican. And there's nothing else. Like, and people will still, you know, feel differently, but just because of who is centered. So sometimes I know like I don't really have to do anything, but just write somebody like me in the story, and that's enough. That's kind of where we're at right now. I think hopefully in the future we'll move past that.
Yeah, and I think that's super important, and I'm glad that you brought that up, especially because I've always, and I'm kind of curious, just, you know, because I kind of like, people know I'm like a horror geek and a sci-fi geek and all that, but I know that like my experience of the spaces, you know, might be different, because it's like I'm kind of the default like audience, right? Like historically, like it's always like white cishet male protagonist kind of thing, like or in a lot of instances. So I'm just kind of curious about you know, your experience with like approaching, like, did you find genre fiction more approachable, or did it feel um, well, I don't know. I guess I'm just kind of curious about your experience of that, especially because you are working on projects that like seek to center kind of like BIPOC voices and these sorts of things.
Yeah, I mean, you always have the outliers. So you'll have people that aren't, you know, I'm not the new person. I'm not new to centering these people. I'm joining a canon of folks that have already done it. So there's that. But one thing that genre work, sci-fi and horror has in common, this common thread, is that it is about the other. There is an otherness in all of it. The protagonist or the person who is centered, even if it is, like you said, like default cis white male, he's still other somehow. He's not like the other boys. He's not, there's something. There's always something. He sees dead people. He, you know, like something's going on. He's not just like the regular football quarterback. You know, he's not that. He can't be. He's an outsider in some way. You know, even if that is the default, or you know, then sometimes when it's women, but there's always and then you're other, right? There's always the tension of like, I'm trying to mainstream, but I'm a werewolf. I'm trying to, you know, like, and then I got to do this thing that makes me outside of everybody else. And that speaks can speak to a cultural experience. So I did always feel welcome because you are talking about the outsiders.
Yeah, no, that's that's so interesting. Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I also, just because we have kind of talked a little bit about like, you know, Goosebumps and Christopher Pike and all of these things, it sounds, I guess I'm curious about the how you approach these things like in a young adult context, right? Are there thing, I guess, would you approach like your like stuff that's meant for young adults differently than you do your adult fiction? Do you feel like how fuzzy are the boundaries? And I guess I'm curious about your approach there.
Yeah, I'm new to that. I definitely, when I was writing Wham, I was still working in the school. So it was very much very inspired by my students and pulling from things that I heard them say and really paying attention to the details of their lives of like, what do you have to do when you walk into the school and check in, what does that feel like? Not just as a teacher, but things that they told me because of the kind of work that I was doing, which was in arts ed. You're often making an investment in youth culture. So you're looking up what they're into and figuring out a way to incorporate it into your lesson plan. So, I mean, I wasn't a fan of Cardi B, and then I started working there, and now I was like, I like Cardi B. Like, they convinced me. They explained, and I was like, you know what? Yeah. And now I'm on board. So, I would say I kind of put on hold this other short story that I think is not going to be a short story. I think it's going to be a novella, but it was very much about, it's based on something that one of the young actors in the film told me about, or told a group about during one of our talkbacks, right, at one of our screenings, where she talked about this never eat alone policy that was happening in her school, where they would just sort of like force the teachers to eat with students if they saw them eating by themselves. And the whole thing sounded a bit like, what are we doing here? And just hearing it from her perspective of like, I'm sure there was some other language around it. And I'm thinking of like what the principal and the assistant, the school admin, like how they viewed it, but hearing her talk about it, right? Then they make them sit with us. And then she had one example where the kid ends up eating alone anyway. And she's like, it just doesn't work. She was basically critiquing like the ineffectiveness of it, right? Of what they were trying to do, which is make sure that students aren't eating alone and kind of like, I don't know, smooth over tensions between student and teachers. And so that is one thing that I try to keep in mind when I'm venturing into that space of just like, remember, it's kind of us against them. It's kind of kids against grown-ups. Like, that's, just remember that. And then oftentimes like what you think was, you're well-intentioned and you're making these choices as an adult to protect them, but consider the places that they fall short, right? Because you have this information that they don't have. And so from their perspective, it just kind of like looks like a failed attempt. Like, I try to keep that center. And yeah, that's the thing that I'm holding on to right now whenever I venture into writing that space. That and language, to pay attention to the way, making sure that my young people talk like how young people talk and not how adults speak. Just, little things like that.
Yeah, that makes sense, because that's I feel like what you're describing is making me kind of rethink some of those same books I read growing up, and that was always like a common thread, right? Like the adults didn't understand, or they just, they were just so out of touch with what was really going on. And yeah, so that makes a ton of sense.
And it's true, like, you are.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you are out of touch with you've no idea what this feels like. I think about just, I remember, okay, so this is gonna get a little dark, but like Nancy Pelosi, when she spoke about the younger staff, like the interns and the apprentices during what happened during the insurrection, the way that they were able to like act and put stuff in front of the doors and knew like to stay away from the windows, like all the things that they knew because of the amount of active shooter drills that they have had through school, that like she was like, I looked at these folks and they knew exactly what to do and they were telling us what to do, and like that struck her. Right, so that's like of note when you're writing for young people, of things that folks had to do in school that like you just didn't even have, that wasn't a part of your drills. And as a teacher, I know what it's like to do an active shooter drill, but I'm experiencing that as an adult. just trying to keep like things in this and like these trends that like, again, they're about safety, but it's like, how does it feel when you're 12? Like, but is that really, and then that's where that divide comes in of like, you don't understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
You want it to be one way, but that's not the way it is, or
Right.
that's not the way it feels for me. So holding on to that because I love those authors so much, and they really did do that for me. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I really felt like they were talking to me, and they knew, they understood me.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Um, I since we're kind of in our last few minutes here, one of the things I always like to do is, because to a certain degree, I feel like that people I invite on to chat with are always kind of at the mercy of the questions that kind of jump out at me or interest me as I'm kind of chatting. But I always like to give a few minutes for you to just talk about anything that you wanted to talk about that didn't kind of come up in a question, or that you're really excited about, or just want to make sure that you have a chance to address. So I just kind of wanted to leave that open if there was anything, yeah, that you particularly wanted to talk about here at the end.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so curious about this series and the library at your university. Like, I'm curious about you. Did you just decide to start this, or was there somebody who was like, you must give interviews, or yeah, what brought this that you're doing now about?
Oh, well, that's funny you should ask. So I'm used to doing, I mean, historically, I've just done outreach events on campus. So we have like things where like, like movie viewings for students, and then we'll do things with like therapy dogs, like all sorts of stuff. But with COVID and everything, I knew that we'd be doing stuff on Zoom, and so uh, I just thought it would be cool to reach out to people who we might not otherwise be able to bring to campus, right? Because for budgetary reasons. So I was like, this is my chance to reach out to people across the country whose work is really interesting, or are doing cool things, and then just like be able to talk with them. So that's just kind of the genesis of that, and yeah.
And I mean, what has this past year been like for you in terms of your practice, as well as I don't know if you have an arts practice too, or even, your work as a librarian, your arts practice, if you have one, like what has it been like for you in this time?
Oh yeah. Well, thanks for asking. Yeah, so I think generally, for most of us on campus, especially, and in libraries, it's again just moving on to Zoom, and like having to teach classes on Zoom and in these digital spaces has been definitely a learning curve and a learning experience. Uh, and I do, in terms of the art side of things, so I do some creative writing. In fact, I just completed my MFA last year, and I feel like, and this might actually be something that I could ask about too, because has it been difficult to kind of create in the last year, like in terms of just the interrupting of the usual rhythms and stuff, because that's certainly been true in my case.
I was able to have more control of my time because I didn't have a commute anymore. So that really helped me. And to your point of being able to speak with people with a greater ease because it's all happening digitally, like then I was able to bring some friends together and be like, let's just start a writers group. And we're like, yeah. And it was just so much easier to do because we didn't have to go anywhere or rent a space or anything. Um, so in that way, it's really great. I'm finding it difficult now as things start to transition back, and there's like this kind of hybrid sort of something that's going on, and I just like, I can't. Yeah, now I'm finding it like exhausting because I just don't know like where to look. I'm like, am I going outside? Am I not going outside? Is it good to go outside? Can I get the vaccine? Like, it's just like so many things and then there's still all this other stuff that's going on, and folks that are passing, there's still all this grief. um so yeah, it's like not when it was happening. I think there was something about being hunkered down that allowed me to be in my head like unapologetically because everybody was inside, that now it's like, no, that's not really how it needs to go anymore. And I think it's also just like, it took the year for it to really hit me like, oh God, this is happening. This is still had this happen. This is still happening. I have to process like, how do I feel now? Like, I don't know. It's weird for me now, but definitely it's weird. I mean, I had some friends who like, I can't make anything. And I think that's fine. Like, I actually think that we should all just stop for a minute. It's been a lot. Let's all sit, just sit and process what's happened. It's been a lot and it's still going on. Like, it's relentless. So I don't blame you.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And I'm glad that you mentioned the weirdness of it, because I think that ties in perfectly with one of the things I love about genre is just how it leans into the weird. So are there any particular places that people should go to check out your work? Website, social media, anything in particular you'd like to make?
Yeah, I'm pretty active on Instagram. I'm flirting with the idea of starting a TikTok, but I'm not really sure what I would do there. I'm not funny. So, and I thought about like making like little horror films on TikTok. I'm like, I don't know. Anyways, so right now it's Dusky Projects, DUSKY Projects on Instagram, and that'll connect you to everything else. That'll connect you to the podcast. It's also there. And then there's my website, which is just my name, WimotoNyoka.com. And I update that pretty regularly. So those are the two like active spaces. That can lead you to direct link to the podcast if you want to listen to it. It's available everywhere that there's a podcast. So you can always just look up Black Women Are Scary and find it. We're in production for our 9th episode. So we've got like 8 up already. And it's great. It's new authors and new publications too. So there's like, if you want to read like an anthology, if you're into that, you might be into this. So we just did a couple of short stories from this anthology called Slay, which is all vampire noir stories. Super fun.
Yeah.
And now we're doing something from Midnight and Indigo because they released a speculative fiction issue. So a lot of that is available online as well as printed copy. And that's like myriad different kinds of speculative fiction, from horror to sci-fi to all kinds of things. All these like really great authors. I'm like, look at you. Where's your book? Like if you just want to like find about new people,
Yeah.
So yeah, that's me right now. I'm also trying to just like slow down.
Sure.
Sit, think.
That yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, and thank you for chatting with us. I really appreciate it.
Appreciate the invite. You have no idea. I was so honored when you reached out, when you were like, your work is great. I was like, you know who I am?
Yeah. Yes, and I will say that if you decide to do the horror TikToks, that sounds phenomenal.
Does it?
I think that'd be so cool.
The idea. I was thinking about like, maybe I just reenact favorite scenes using inanimate objects. So it's kind of ridiculous. But I don't know. I don't know. I'll do some test runs. I'll send some like little videos to you and you tell me what you think.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Wi-Moto. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Thank you.